Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. Good morning.
So this is being live streamed, and I'd just like to invite Madison, who is controlling the live stream, to close up the shot so it looks like there's a real lot of people here. Hello?
Send light.
I can see them.
Send light now. Maybe these spotty things. Yeah, those.
I don't think she was talking about us, or was she? That we're in the dark? I've had that said about me often.
It feels that way sometimes. In the dark.
I'll tell you what kind of week this has been. We've been doing a lot of traveling. This is the busiest couple of months that Interfaith Amigos have ever had. Last weekend we were in Las Vegas. We were headlining at the Flamingo. Well, you got to start somewhere. So there was a young reporter who wanted to write an article about us for the Las Vegas newspaper. And shortly after we got there, we did a phone interview with her. Oh, maybe half hour to 45 minutes, and she taped it. And then she came to the major event, and she was taking all kinds of notes. When the article appeared, it was kind of short, but perhaps that was a good thing. I don't know how many of you have heard Jamal with one of his signature teachings, you know, that the most important thing is that we get to know each other. And he uses the image of 3 cups of tea. Listen, respect, connect. Listen, respect, connect. So here's the Las Vegas article, and she's quoting Jamal. And that was the key. Coming to know one another on a human level, he said Sunday. That's one of the best ways to overcome polarization. We think of it as sharing 3 cups of tea. Lipton, respect, and connect. You know, the first time I read this, I read it quickly. I didn't see it. I was sitting at the teriyaki place across the way having a snack Wednesday afternoon before the evening program. And I decided to look at it again, and I'm sitting there, and I read that. There's only maybe 4 other people in the place, and I start laughing out loud. And every time I looked down at it, I laughed. And it's just one of those things. There's no way I could explain this to the other people who were sitting there, and I'm sure they had no interest in it anyways. Lipton, respect, and connect. And I just wonder, it's a wonderful thing.
So maybe you should change your Shema teaching. Lipton, Israel.
Lipton, Israel, the eternal one is our God. You know? I'm surprised it never came out that way now.
Good to start with a laugh.
On the way out of our house, I just walked outside to one of those magic moments in the fall where leaves are falling, you know, with the colors and the wind. And I love the fall. I love the spring. It's one of the things that we loved most about the weather in Seattle when we moved here. The longest springs and the longest falls. I have the sense it's not quite like that anymore. But it reminded me of one of my favorite poems by a Palestinian-American poet named Naomi Shihab Nye. It's called The Art of Disappearing. Do you know it? Well, then what's the sense of reading it? You know that story of the mullah? Okay. This is called The Art of Disappearing. When they say, you know, and she's a poet, when they say, "Don't I know you?" say no. When they invite you to the party, remember what parties are like before answering. Someone telling you in a loud voice they once wrote a poem. Greasy sausage balls on paper plate. Then reply. If they say we should get together, say, why? It's not that you don't love them anymore. You're trying to remember something too important to forget. Trees, the monastery bell at twilight. Tell them you have a new project. It will never be finished. When someone recognizes you in a grocery store, nod briefly and become a cabbage. When someone you haven't seen in 10 years appears at the door, don't start singing him all your new songs. You will never catch up. And this is why the poem came this morning. Walk around feeling like a leaf. Know you could tumble any second. Then decide what to do with your time. And the other thing I wanted to mention before I get into anywhere near what I planned on talking about this morning. On the drive up here, I was listening to a piece of a radio show called The Hidden Brain. Anybody hear it this morning? Was that? That was fascinating. He was talking to a historian who just wrote a book about democracy, and he was talking about conflict. And he was talking about the creative value of conflict. And it's something that we tend to forget, you know, because in seeking peace and in seeking peaceful solutions to our own problems and to the world's problems, we kind of want to decrease conflict. And essentially he was saying That's not the way to help. That conflict can be incredibly creative. That from substantial conflict come creative ideas and creative energies. And one of the markers he commented on that I think was particularly touching to me was that one of the great signs of a democracy is you're going to have winners and losers. I mean, there's no way around that. That's how it works. But the way the winners treat the losers and the way the losers treat the winners will reflect the health of the system. It used to be that the winners would, in some way reach out to those others in some kind of supportive way. And it used to be that those who lost would appreciate. And it's just a reminder, I guess, to me, the old difference between honoring conflict and throwing people out of my heart. How do I honor conflict and not pretend it's not there? How do I honor conflict and know, that some things are really important and worth the conflict? But somehow know that we're all in this together. How do we make a bigger story? How do we make a bigger community? How do we open to a greater self? So the last line of that poem where it talks about being a leaf and knowing that at any moment we could tumble. So what do we want to do with our time? And that's what this is about. In other words, what we want to do with our time is to become a screen in the front of a sanctuary. I think what I want to do with my time is open to gratitude. Because gratitude is like a door that opens me to the present. So I start, I'm grateful to be here. And I'm grateful to be with each and every one of you.
Exactly where we want to be.
We're exactly where I want to be. We're exactly where I want to be.
We're exactly where you want to be.
Yeah.
And with who you want to be with. Thank you, living and eternal being. Thank you, eternal one. Sarta b'nishmati b'chemla, Rabbi Munatecha. Thank you, living and eternal being. Thank you, eternal one. Thank you, living and eternal being. Thank you, eternal one. You have given me this life with compassion. You have given me this life with compassion. You have given me this life with compassion. Thank you, eternal living one.
When we go out with amigos at a certain point in our program, and you've probably seen this, we read out of our texts. And, I don't know exactly when this started, but the Hebrew Bible is kind of heavy because it's got Hebrew in it and English. So I started carrying this, and I introduced this. I say, my colleagues brought their sacred texts, and I brought the original tablet. You know that there's a Torah portion, a portion from the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible that's assigned to every week during the year, so that the year we read it through. And it's a spiritual practice, because when I look at a portion, if all I saw in it is what I saw last year, then I know I haven't moved. Because spiritual literature is a reflection of the spiritual beings through whom that literature flowed. And the essential nature of a spiritual being is that a spiritual being has unlimited levels of transcendence. The ego kind of tends to think, well, these are the stages, and once you get there, you're there. And of course, once you get there, you're stuck. But once we get there, we must enjoy the there before, letting go of it. So part of the challenge of a spiritual journey is, what do I have to let go of now? Because unless I let go, there's not going to be an opening, and there's not going to be a next, and there's not going to be a more. And on the spiritual journey, there's always more. And so this is the way chapter 12 starts. Vayomer Adonai el Avram, and the Eternal One spoke to Avram. This is before Abraham became Abraham, and this is when he was Abram. Because something happens to us on our journey, and sometimes that what happens is reflected in a change of name. But what's remarkable to me at the beginning, Levi Yitzchak, who was one of the early followers of the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic master in the 18th century, used to look at the text, and all he could, the furthest he could go was Vayomer Adonai. And the Eternal One said, because he couldn't go any further, like, that's so big. What is, what do you mean? It doesn't say, it just says, the Eternal One said to Moses, to Avram, to Abram. And then it goes on to say. But what do we imagine? Like it's a story, but at what point does Avram go, what? Who? Do you know? And we just read along and go, oh yeah. I mean, do you think this eternal presence talks any differently now than that eternal presence ever talked? Like once God had a mouth? Julian Jaynes, do you know? The Origin of the Bicameral Mind thought that before the corpus callosum got fully formed, the corpus callosum is the bundle of nerves that connects the right and left hemisphere of our corpus callosum. Before that got fully formed, when intuited awareness happened, we thought it was coming from outside, not inside. And he imagines that when people heard voices, it was actually an inner voice, but they couldn't identify it as an inner voice. And then once the biological connections got made more fully, then we started perceiving that differently. Then it was a flash of intuition, a different kind of connection. But as far as I can tell, Avram never read Julian Jaynes. Vayomer Adonai el Avram, Lech Lecha, which is why that song is there. Lech Lecha is like an imperative. Get you out. Me artzecha, get out of your land, umi moladetcha, and from the place of your birth, umi beit avicha, and from your parents' house, el haaretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. Ve'escha legoy gadol, and I shall make you a great nation. Ve'avarechecha, and I will bless you. Ve'agadla shemecha, and I will make your name great. Ve'heye bracha, and you will be a blessing. Now, of course, the next thing Abraham did was what? He packed up his stuff to get out of Haran. He was incidentally 75 years old at that point. I used to see that as really hopeful, because most of my life I was not yet 75. So I always felt, well, I had time. But now I'm no longer 75, and it's a whole different thing, and I wonder, well, did I miss it? Or is this something to which we are called constantly? Not just on the week that we read it, but how have we gotten attached in a way that has us going our lives on automatic? How have we gotten attached so that we're not seeing each other? You know how the brain works about meeting people. When we first meet people, it's hard to associate their names and faces. And then once we associate the names with the face and then we see them, oh yes, I know you. In a lot of ways at that point, we're not seeing each other anymore. Because what happens is the mind presents the image that fits that person, and we are responding to that image rather than to the actual person. Our brains go on automatic. We have to get along in our world. And that has a consequence. I always think about learning to drive a stick-shift car. Pretty soon that's going to be a reference that's not going to make any sense to people. How many learn to drive on a stick shift? So you remember at the beginning, it's like, oh God, I got to put down the clutch and I got to do the gear and then I got to start it and then I got to put a little gas and then all of a sudden it's automatic. You don't think about it anymore because the body's got it. Touch typing is like that. if you're able to do the touch typing and you start thinking about it, you can't type. At least I can't type. But then we go, how many other things have I gone on automatic about? And the weird thing is we can't actually tell until we wake up. So the call, it's like, it's almost like, what if we let go of everything? Well, not that. Lech lecha me'artzecha. Get out of your land. Umimoladatcha, and from the place of your birth. Umi beit avicha, and from your parents' house, literally from your father's house. And I was thinking about that in terms of what locks us in. Boy, that screen just went away, and it came up with an ad for a book called Feeling Very Good as a way into the happiness zone. It's fun to be at the tail end of a cold and wonder where my voice is. I would say cut that out of the tape, but the last time I said something like that, I was reminded that this is streaming and we can't cut it out of the tape. So I was thinking, okay, what keeps us locked in? And I think there are three things. One is our story. Each of us has a story. And our story is often very complicated, but it's our story. And I noticed something years ago in working with people to suggest they change their story. Like it's just our story. So what happens if I change it? Not to defraud, not to, but, and I noticed that people are really reluctant to change their story. Wait a minute. But our story keeps us locked in. And I think that's not only an individual thing, I think that's a cultural thing. I think that's a religious thing. I think every religion has its story. You know what? I have something warm up here. Thank you. Every religion has its story. And one of the interesting things about that is our stories don't connect. There's a Jewish story. And this Abraham thing is part of the Jewish story, and the story keeps unfolding, but it's a Jewish story. There's a Christian story that starts at a certain place. It kind of incorporates some of the stuff before it, but it shifts it because it's only really interested in a Christian story, and there's a Muslim story, and there's a Hindu story, and there's a Buddhist story. And our stories really don't connect. And there's something really destructive about that. Just more and more I notice that we have words of connection, but we keep modeling separateness. So what do we do with our stories? And which is our story? Get out of Lech lecha me'artzecha, get out of your land. Umi moladetcha, and from the place of your birth. Umi beit avicha, and from the house of your parents. Well, in a way, we got stories about all of them, don't we? We got a family story. We got who we were told we were, who we found out we were, or who we had to be. And our story pertains to the land. Some of us feel a connection to the land where we grew up. Some of us don't feel a connection to the land we grew up. It all depends on whether you grew up in Manhattan or you grew up in Cleveland. That's a personal thing. I grew up in Cleveland. I don't feel a connection to Cleveland. Ruth grew up in Manhattan. She feels a connection to Manhattan. I'm sure some people feel a connection to Cleveland, but Umi Beit Avicha. Wow. Well, I said that already. Mi Beit Avicha story, family story, place story. Mi Moladetcha. And the story about our birth. Even the story that our lives began when we were born. And our lives end when we die. Even that's an interesting story. Where were we before that? Where will we be after that? What is this that we're carrying? You know, it's like, in what way do we limit the nature of our own being? So I wonder, if I was to leave my story, to get out of my story, what story would I select? I'm not going to ask you to select your story right now. I just want to encourage you to think about that. What would you like your story to be, or what would you like your story to have been? And if you want your story to be exactly as it was, how do you want it to turn out? How do you want it to shift you? One of the other things that I think keeps us stuck has to do with community. Each and every one of us needs community. You know, it's just a human need. And I don't know how many of you are still in the communities that you were in, or, like me, watching communities shift over time. And then there are some people who kind of keep showing up in your community. Grateful. I'm tempted to say mostly, but that's actually not true. I'm grateful. But communities do limit. I mean, that's, in a way, that's part of the purpose. But it's like, okay, what do I want my community to be? How do I want to operate in my community? What would I like to provide for my community? What would I like my community to support? You know, I mean, here we are. What would it be to leave the almosts and the not quites and go, okay, what would I like to move out into? So there's a community that goes with each of those. There's a community that goes with the land, my land. There's a community that goes with family. There's a community that goes with birth. And the third thing I think of that limits me is my sense of identity. It's like my story, my community. Community can be family, you know. And my identity. It's like, who am I in the midst of this? And I have an identity that, again, goes with birth and goes with land and goes with I forgot the third thing already. With what? Family, land, and birth. So, if I get to a place where I go, okay, I want to let go and I want to open up to the possibilities of a greater story, to the possibilities of a more inclusive community, and to the possibilities of a more inclusive identity, where I know I'm wandering around in a separate body, but I know that's just part of my repertoire. And I know that something bigger is going on here. How will I know that I'm choosing, that the story I'm choosing is a bigger and better story? How will I know that the community I'm choosing is a bigger and more productive and more loving community? How will I know that the identity I am opening to is a greater, more productive identity? And it basically says it. It's measured in whether we find ourselves to be a blessing. And what does it mean to be a blessing? On a literal level, for me, it means when I'm sitting next to somebody, even if I'm not talking to them, and I just feel better, versus, sitting next to somebody and even not having any direct interchange, but somehow it doesn't feel good. That's part of how I know. How am I able to support those who are around me? And how does my story support? And how does my community support? How is my community a blessing for all who touch it? And how is my story a blessing for all who touch it? And how is my identity a blessing? Man, that's a big deal. And there's a secret to this text. And it's like so many secrets in Scripture, it's a secret in plain sight. But you got to know a little Hebrew. Lech lecha, which is, that's the first words that Avram hears, or the storyteller tells, it's irrelevant, it's an idiom that means like get the hell out. Well, you could just say lech from. Lech lecha is an idiom, which is an emphatic imperative, get out. But if you read lech lecha simply, literally, lech means go, and lecha means to yourself. So all of a sudden, it's saying, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go to yourself from the external land with which you have been identifying yourself. Lech lecha mimoladetcha, go to yourself from this notion of birth and death that you've been identifying with. Lech lecha mi beit avicha, go to yourself from the stories that you've learned from family, from the people you've been with. And that's a whole different story. So in a lot of ways, Avram couldn't hear that. And most of the time we can't. You know the statistics on people moving, married couples moving, like building a house, like making things better. The statistics are interesting because the divorce rates, once the new house is finished or once the remodel is done, spike. Well, because people think, well, what needs to change is out there. And if we could change it out there, things will be better. And that's a way of distraction, because what really needs to change is in here. And what needs to change in here? What do we got to focus on in here? So what would it mean? What would it mean if we got it, that the land we're seeking is already within us? The story we're seeking is within us. The community we're seeking is within us. Each of us has our way yearning for us to find it. And so we become a song ready to be sung. This song has a lot of ch sounds.
Yes. Good to practice.
Ch.
Now, we're going to sing the first verse twice and the second verse twice, like twice in a row. Because maybe you haven't heard the song before, and then you get to sort of sing the first one without going to the second one. Then singing those same words a couple times, maybe it goes in a little bit deeper, you know. Let's find out.
I should say something about the words, because l'simchat chayim, a simcha is a joy. Simcha is a rejoicing. So when it says l'simchat chayim, means for a rejoicing in life, for a rejoiceful life.
Journey.
we set this up with cues, and then I forget them. Now, of course, I forget them because I chose a different story, but I know.
Nice try.
This is why I don't make a good congregant. No, it felt like the next song was a perfect follow-up. L'chilach, incidentally, is what you'd say to a woman. Lech lecha, because Hebrew there's no way of... Lech lecha is how you'd say it to a man. Get you out or go to yourself. And l'chilach is how you'd say it to a woman. So that's why that's two ways up there. I mean, you could use both of them, to those parts of self. And it just felt like there's only one place to be. And if we really release ourselves to the wonder of this moment,
There's only one place to be, that's in this moment. There's only one thing to do, and that's be present. There's only one thing to have, and that's unending gratitude for being in this present moment. There's only one place to be, that's in this moment. There's only one thing to do, and that's be present. There's only one thing to have, and that's unending gratitude for being in this present moment. There's only one place to be, that's in this moment. There's only one thing to do, and that's be present. There's only one thing to have, and that's unending gratitude for being in this present moment. For being in this present moment. For being in this present moment.
you brought a song. It's called Wildflower. It's a Waylon Jennings song.
Actually, it's a Tom Petty song
It's a Tom Petty song.
that I heard the Waylon Jennings do.
They stole a Tom Petty song.
You belong among the wildflowers
You know, as I was watching, that's lovely. And as I was watching you play, I was thinking, I remember you before you knew how to play a ukulele. No, really. I, you know, like you've developed, both of you have developed and I'm grateful. I think when we met, Jenny played the cello. And she's gotten progressively smaller. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure both are true, but one of the things that keeps striking me is that it's just watching how my mind works. And of course, probably we all have a tendency to universalize, like chances are every mind works the same way. So we try it out. I say things that my mind is doing to see if that's accurate or if I'm totally bonkers. My mind has a natural tendency to practice my problems. My mind has a natural tendency to kind of practice what's wrong. My mind spends precious little time practicing solutions. And I don't think that's my mind's fault. I think that's my mind's way of trying to keep me safe. The mind, the individual mind, is developed as an instrument to help us maneuver in the material world. And the material world requires a good deal of maneuvering. Weird things. One of the weirdest things is with little kids who crawl under a table and try to stand up. And they hit something with a part of their body they didn't know existed. Because we don't have a direct awareness of this part. It's like, what happened? You see things and you try to avoid them, but you can't. So in a lot of ways, our minds do us the service of watching out for us. But then there's a consequence of that, because that becomes a habit. And so teachers through the ages have tried to talk to us about how the mind can utilize the free flow of consciousness in creative and productive ways. Because there is no greater energy than consciousness. And it is simply true that the things we focus on tend to grow, and the things we don't focus on tend not to grow. So how much of the time do you spend in the world you'd like to live in the body you'd like to live in the way you'd like to be living. And I'm sure the answer is different for each of us, but one of the things I try to remember when I find myself really stuck is to tithe my time. You know, normally tithing is seen as something we do financially, but it works no matter what energy we're looking at. Tithing time means spending 6 minutes out of every hour practicing solutions, or 12 minutes out of every 2 hours, or 24 minutes, you know. How much of my time will I freely offer to how I'd like to be in the world, what I'd like my mind to be thinking, what I'd like to be telling myself about how it is right now. It's like doing a diary entry at the end of a day, imagining, I might not know exactly what I did during the day, but imagining feeling like I want to feel at the end of a day. I want to feel some tiredness because I did something with my energy. But I want to feel alive because what I did was stimulating. I want to feel grateful. I want to have notions of how to make it better tomorrow. I want to end the day with greater compassion for myself and greater compassion for all those around me. I want to end the day feeling more love. So I want to begin the day with thank you. And I want to end the day with thank you. And I don't care what tradition, what culture, what land, what story, they converge. All the stories converge with love, with gratitude, with compassion, with possibility. So the essential question to each other is, how does your story support love? How does your story support compassion? How does your community support love? How does your community support compassion? How does your community support forgiveness? How does your community support possibility? How does your identity support love? How does your identity support forgiveness? How does your identity support possibility? How does your identity support greater connection? Thank you. The idea of nigun is a melody that has no words. And the idea of it is that it's a kind of melody that we repeat, and it usually has an A and a B part. There's some structure. And it's an energy that strives to reach into the soul to find the prayers yearning to be prayed. And I think the reason we do it without words is that the real prayers yearning to be prayed are not prayers with words. Because words keep fragmenting things, separating things. I think what's waiting to be prayed is the opening of the heart. I think what's waiting to be prayed is the opening of every cell of the body to the natural energies of life. I think what's waiting to be prayed is the unfolding of greater gratitude and greater possibility. I think what's waiting to be prayed is the opening of greater acceptance and greater joy. So we'll take this melody and invite it to reach down and find those prayers. And then we'll move from the melody into a moment of meditation. And from that meditation, we'll rediscover the melody. Perhaps it always starts with silence. Allowing the mind, allowing the heart, allowing the body to meet us with that which needs to be held, that which needs to be met. What is it in me in need of love at this moment? recognizing that as we move into the silence, as we move into the space where we can witness the body, from a place where it's quite clear we have a body, yet we are more than the body. Witnessing feelings, allowing, accepting, holding, and at the same time recognizing that we have feelings, yet we are more than those feelings. And being aware of the activities of the mind. And allowing ourselves to simply know that we have a mind and we are so much more. Appreciating that the greatest limits of our experience, of our awareness, exist the further our attention moves to the outer world. And the greater openness, the greater space where boundaries fall away one after the other exists in an inner world. And the keys to opening the gates to those inner spaces are called unconditional acceptance. The keys are called love. The keys are called gratitude. The keys are called forgiveness. There is an awareness that one can live life being a blessing. And with the keys to the inner world, it becomes clear that we already are blessing. We already are connected. We already are loving, and we already are loved. We already are forgiving, and we already are forgiven. And we already are more. And when we revisit what we perceive to be the boundaries in our outer world, we are better able to remember that the more closely we examine those apparent boundaries, the clearer it is that those boundaries are largely created by our senses, to keep us safe. But in fact, the more we look into the nature of that outer reality, the clearer it becomes that it is, in fact, a reflection of the absolute interconnectedness of the inner world. And we know that we live in a sea of consciousness. We live as a sea of consciousness. And we are asked to find clearer ways of holding that consciousness in loving forms, in channeling that consciousness into energies of blessing, to energies of healing, affirming wholeness, affirming deep and abiding joy, affirming love, affirming life. It must be the influence of sitting on airplanes for so many hours that I have kept you in your seats with your seat belts fastened for the whole hour and a half. apologize for that, and you're free to disconnect the seatbelt, and if you don't know how, you could lift up on the lever. It is astonishing to me that they go through the ritual of telling us how to fasten and unfasten a seatbelt. It is also amazing to me that so many of us survived driving for so long before seatbelts were invented. So I think it would be a good idea to stand up. And I also thought it would be a good idea to conclude where we began, with gratitude. Is that all right? Okay, the words are up there. They're read from left to right. Left, they start this way and go that way. So to kind of make up for making you sit for so long, we're going to stay standing for a little while. Ruth held up the basket to remind me that we actually are able to have our spiritual Saturdays because of the support that you provide. So for those of you who have not made use of the basket, it will be there on the table outside. You should know that you are being recorded as you put things into the basket. And the degree of spiritual sometimes it seems like that in our world. The people who have the most power have the most money, or the people who have the most money have the most power. And the secret is that's actually not true. I think the people who have the most love have the most power. I don't think it's a matter of who has the most toys when we die, wins, or who has the most money when we die wins. It's the ones who have the most joy win. The ones who have the most love win. So I think that's what it's about for me to be in this sanctuary. I think that's what it's about on a Saturday, or that's what it's about on a Sunday, or that's what it's about on conversation circles, or on a Seder, or, whatever's high holidays. It's about practicing who we really are and practicing what we really are. So that somewhere deep inside we're going, yippee. That's a sacred spiritual word. So thank you. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your willingness, and thank you for your trust. Thank you for your music. And most of all, thank you for being exactly who you are. Holy One, thank you. Thank you for this space and for this community. Thank you for this day. Thank you for these connections. Thank you for this love. Help us carry this through this week and more. And help us find ever clearer, more supportive, and more loving ways to support each other as we journey from well, let's start with strength. As we journey from strength to strength, from love to love, and from life to life. Whew. Shabbat shalom, everybody.